What's up guys? I just wanted to give a quick update on the speaker testing, some V30 trivia and this channel. Basically, I just want to tie up some loose ends and address some topics that aren't worthy of a dedicated video, at least in my opinion. If you haven't seen my 50 plus vintage 30 speaker shootout or my newer video on the 2022 vintage 30s, I'd highly recommend you'd watch them first, or at least the new video on the 2022 speakers, because otherwise a good chunk of this video won't make any sense to you. But feel free to ignore my advice and instead just marvel at the aerodynamic shape of my head while I get eaten alive by mosquitoes in my garage for the next few minutes. Anyway, I'll be addressing a handful of topics in this video, but I've put timestamps in the description to help you navigate. Feel free to skip to the parts you're interested in. First of all, some of you might have seen my community post about my Marshall 1960 AV cab that I got recently. I bought this from Toman's eBay store where they sell repaired instruments, and this 1960 AV looked like it had fallen off a truck. Inside of it, all the screws were loose, but there was a treasure to be found. In that cab were 4 Marshall G12 vintage speakers from 2021, and they have cones that start with a Z, so cones that I suspect are from the short period of time where the cones sounded like they did in the early 2000s, meaning they generate lower sound pressure levels between 5 and 6 kilohertz. Interestingly enough, these don't have transparent dust caps. These look pretty black to me. I don't know if you can see that on the video. I still very much consider the 5 to 6 kilohertz thing to be a hypothesis on my part, but that's where these came in very handy. There were basically 2 batches in this cab. 2 of the speakers have cones that say Z18 on them, and 2 of the speakers in the cab had cones that says Z19 on them. So I took one of each out and I shot them out in my ISO cab against this 16 ohm regular vintage 30 from 2019. As I mentioned, I consider the 5 to 6 kilohertz range crucial for these speakers. The speakers built between 2000 and 2003, 2004 generated much lower sound pressure levels between 5 to 6 kilohertz than speakers before or after that, with the apparent exception being the late 2021 speakers and early 2022 speakers. These seem to share that characteristic with the early 2000 speakers, thus making them sound smoother and to most people more pleasant. So let's see where these Marshall G12 vintages stand. Let's take a look at the graphs. And once you look at that, these are no exception. I don't think we need to listen to recordings of these to know how they'll sound. The previous findings tell us that these will sound significantly less harsh than the 2019 reference. Cool, more supporting evidence for the claim that the Z badge cones sound dope. Speaking about the cones, I've seen a bit of confusion about those in the comments, so I'm going to try to clear that up to the best of my knowledge. The main identifier of the speakers is this white sticker here, and that gives us all kinds of information like the speaker type, the impedance, where the speaker was made, and when it was made, or when it was QC'd possibly. These white stickers have been around since about 2001. Before that, Celestion used to stamp that information on the side of the basket, like so. That's not the only identifier on the speaker though. If you take a close look at the outside of the cone, you will find a white stamp on it, which tells you the cone type that was used for it and what appears to be a batch code, at least on the Celestion speakers that use cones made by Kurt Müller. The codes weren't introduced until about 2001, 2002 again. The older speakers don't have those. All of my pre-2002 speakers only have the cone number stamped on. I don't know if you can see this. The codes are made up of a letter and 2 numbers. The earliest ones I have, around 2002, start with C, and they move up alphabetically throughout the years. By 2021, we were at the letter Z. The numbers after the letter also increase, but they seem to increase relative to the letter. I haven't been able to find out exactly what these codes mean. I can only speculate there. It seems to me, though, that the letter at the beginning is the larger identifier. I could imagine that these indicate a batch of raw material or a batch of pulp, for example. The numbers after the letter possibly indicate a smaller batch, like a machining run or something. I've speculated about this quite a bit, wondering what they could be. I've wondered if the number after the letter indicates the day of the month they were made, but that can't be because I've seen the numbers go as high as 50. So then I wondered if the number indicates the calendar week that the cone was made, but looking at the chronology of the speakers I have, that also doesn't make sense. It could also be that the number indicates the machine making the cone, but as I've seen them go as high as 50, I don't really think that makes sense. I can't imagine Kurt Müller have 50 or more machines making these cones, so the most likely scenario here seems to be, to me, that the letter indicates the material batch and the number indicates the machining run. So I think it could be that they produce various batches of cones from one batch of material. But keep in mind, this is my hopefully educated guess only. I could be completely wrong about this. This is pure speculation on my part. As I mentioned, by 2021, 2022 roughly, we had arrived at batch code Z. So Kurt Müller or Celestion had exhausted the alphabet. Where do you go from there? Well, they did the same trick they did with the speaker labels. They just flipped the numbers and the letters. So starting late 2021, early 2022, we wouldn't see letter 2 numbers, but 2 numbers followed by letters. So after the, I don't know, Z26 batch came the 01A batch. So as you've probably seen, I've tested various vintage 30s by now with cones from Z batches, namely Z06, Z09, Z18, Z19, and Z26. And all of them sounded to various degrees smoother, meaning less 5 to 6K, than vintage 30s made between 2005 and 2020. Again, there seem to be tolerances at play here. The later 2020 vintage 30s with B batch cones sounded pretty much the same as the vintage 30s sounded from 2005 to 2020 again. Based on the observations I made during my tests and the assumption that the letter on the cone does designate the material batch, I would assume that all speakers with Z on the cones and the letter A on the cones are of the smoother sounding variety. But please keep in mind, and I need to stress this, this is speculation on my part. It's based on my observations and I'm pretty confident about it, but it is of course not a fact. I don't know this. Speaking of vintage 30 identifier trivia, I really want to throw this out here. This large label here does not mean that the speaker was made in England. Celestion started producing vintage 30s in China as early as 2002. I know that because I have some, maybe even 2001. And they continued using this label until at least 2007. So no, sorry, this label alone doesn't mean that your speaker was made in England. I guess this matter was further confused by the fact that the Mesa Boogie OEM speakers still have this label to date. And now you might be wondering, how can I identify if a speaker was made in England or China, if not from the back label? Well, the answer is on the white sticker here. If it has a stamp on the side, then it was made in 2001 or earlier, then it's definitely made in England. But if it has a sticker on here, look for the number 50. All UK-made speakers as early as 2001 were clearly labelled as such, so it always said either made in England or made in the UK. For a couple of years, Celestion didn't clearly label if a speaker was made in China. However, there were white stickers that had the number 50 on it. And I can only think of one reason why you would treat that differently. You'd have one label that says made in UK and one label that doesn't say made in the UK but has a 50 on it. And that is to differentiate between two production lines. Sometime in the 2010s, I don't know when exactly, Celestion started adding made in China on the labels here. I assume they were legally obliged to do so. And the speakers that say made in China still have a 50 on there today. I have never seen a UK made speaker with the number 50 on it. And so, based on my observations, that internet myth is true. If it has a 50 on the white speaker label, then the speaker was made in China. Around the year 2007, Celestion changed the speaker label they used on the back of the magnets here. And in the same year, they started adding suffixes to the type code. So instead of T3903, we'd start to see T3903A or T3903B. And again, I think these are just further designations for where the speaker was made. All of the UK-made speakers I have that were made after the year 2007 have the suffix B, British. All the Chinese-made speakers I have after that time end with the suffix A. So I've never seen a Mesa, Marshall or Bad Cat OEM that ended with the letter A. They all end with the letter B. And most of the regular vintage 30s, the T3903, T3904s, they end with A. But occasionally you'll have a B there. But that would also say made in the UK on the label as well. So not sure why they added that exactly. It seems a little redundant, but it makes identification easier if you're looking for used vintage 30s on eBay, Reverb, whatever. And finally, sometime between 2008 and 2010, Celestion changed the color of the basket slightly to a more golden color, which obviously made the speaker sound better. Tone is in the frame color. And finally, I'm about to start the break-in test. I'm going to grab this camera here and I'm going to show you how I've set this thing up. For the test, I have my trusty Grossmann isocap here with its bondaged up SM57. I have a Seymour Duncan Power Stage 170 for the Room EQ Wizard sweeps, and this orange Micro Terror, through which I will reamp riffs and chugs for several hours using this Palmer Da Capo reamp box, and a dedicated laptop. I've been making frequency response graphs in regular intervals to see if I can observe speaker break-in. I'm very curious about this. Now, some of you may have noticed that this is a different power amp than the ones in the other tests. I got this from my buddy Simon because I finally wanted to use my KSR power amp again. But I verified that this power amp is suitable beforehand. I made the sweeps for the Marshall speakers with this, and the results are of equal quality to those obtained with the KSR power amp in my opinion. I will be taping down all the pots and dials when I start the test to make sure that everything stays the same and we get as accurate results as possible. The Micro Terror should be absolutely powerful enough to break in the speaker. After all, you typically use a 50 or 100 watt head to break in a 4x12, so this should deliver comparable power to this single speaker, and this is loud. Despite being in the isocab, I can hear this pretty well outside of the building. So let's see if I get noise complaints. So why am I showing you this now? Well, this test is gonna take quite a while, and I have no interest in redoing it again if something goes wrong. So if you see something wrong with my setup or my methodology, speak up now or be forever silent. That's all I have for now. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you very soon. Toodaloo!